Now you know the look. You've seen it in countless indie games, in some of the most beloved AAA titles as well, that slightly washed out plasticky sheen, where bright fires that look flat and yellow instead of intensely hot, saturated neon lights that shift into weird, unnatural colors the brighter they get. It's that infamous Unreal Engine look. Now, for years, developers have been wrestling with their lighting and post processing, thinking they were the ones doing something wrong. But what if I told you the problem isn't your lighting at all? The culprit is actually baked right into Unreal Engine itself. I'm talking about the ASUS Filmic Tone Mapper that shifts with Unreal Engine by default. Now, ASUS was originally designed as a brilliant industry standard for the film world. And with the advent of virtual production and its place in the Unreal Engine pipeline, that kind of makes sense. But in the realm of real time rendering and game engines, it has a notorious habit of butchering highly saturated bright colors. Instead of smoothly transitioning to white, ASUS forces bright pixels into an unnatural color shift, which completely washes out the intense, vibrant moment of your scene. Now, the way which ASUS handles lights, saturation, and shadows works perfectly fine for film, where the footage ultimately gets handed off to post where somebody inevitably color corrects the images. However, that pipeline simply just doesn't exist in games, leaving many devs and gamers frustrated, wrestling with color controls, values, and often being left perplexed as to why your scene looks like that. That being the gray muddled visuals we have all become far too accustomed to. Now, if you look on the marketplace as well, you'll find countless tone mappers and alternatives which ultimately amount to post process materials which add a corrective overlay at the cost of performance. Now, these tone mappers aren't necessarily bad, but they're band aids rather than fixes. The fix isn't to make ACES look better, it's to remove it entirely. Enter AgX. Now, AgX is a relatively new image formatting tool that handles extreme brightness and color saturation much closer to the way our eyes actually perceive them. It's already taken the Blender community by storm, practically becoming the new gold standard overnight, and it is soon to be your next best friend when it comes to developing your game in Unreal Engine. Today, I'm going to break down exactly why ASUS is ruining your color, why AGX is the vastly superior alternative that needs to become the new standard for games, and how you can implement it to kill that Unreal Engine look once and for all. So, let's get in. Now, before we just go ahead and dive in, I want to give a little context, a little background. So, we actually discovered this as we're developing our own game, as me and my co-developer are both just color science nerds, lighting nerds, and we noticed that our environments were having that Unreal Engine look, right? Is looking kind of washed out gray. Even in our dark sort of dungeons, it just seemed like there was some sort of like film over it, as well as like some of the colors, as our dungeon is meant to be like a little bit more saturated. And we noticed like the color saturation we were getting just ended up kind of looking a bit, for lack of a better word, weird and almost like hurting your eyes. And there wasn't like a smooth gradient, which we noticed. And so we started looking into alternatives, and there's actually my co-dev who will be guest spotting on here during the tutorial section who came across this and actually was the one able to implement it. And so at first I want to also go through some breakdowns, actually go deeper into the difference between AGX, ASIS, and let's kind of break this color science down in a simple, easy to read manner. So first and foremost here, and I'll link the video in the description down below of where I grabbed these screenshots. But here are just some colors, some lightings that kind of show you the difference in how the tone mappers uh, actually handle these sorts of scenarios. And so we look at, these bright greens, bright blues, and you might think to yourself in one sense that, rarely are you ever going to actually use like a purely blue, purely green light, casting in your scene. However, the important thing to see here is actually the gradients and how the tone mapper actually deals with this. So, as we see here between the different ASIS and then, of course, the AGX, there's a huge difference as far as how it's handling color and how it's handling the actual gradient. And we'll look at the gradients in a bit from actual screen captures of games and such. But this here just kind of hits that point home a little bit more as far as like the difference between AGX and ASIS and just how it handles that. Where like light when it becomes brighter, as we could see here, desaturates naturally, and it becomes sort of really bright, but it doesn't clip. It just becomes brighter and whiter, right? And that's how it should be, and that's how AGX actually handles it. However, when it comes to ACES, it tries to do that, but it ends up obviously just not really being able to live up to that standard, which we all would like it to. And part of it is because of that, it's a filmic tone mapper, emphasis on the filmic aspect, right? Where, it's meant to have a wider range of dynamic range so that it can thus be corrected later on. And it really just doesn't suit the sort of real time standard in graphics, which we are accustomed to and wanting to. So let's actually look at some examples here. So, for example, looking at Blood of the Dawnwalker, at the time of recording this game is not out. Now, these aren't commentaries on these actual games. For example, I'm really excited for this game, but this is a game coming out. It's coming out developed in Unreal Engine, and if we look at the colors here between the two, if we look at the gradients, and you can grab color swatches. By the way, this is really easy to do in Photoshop, and it'll just automatically grab you these colors. But if we look at the differences here, we could see how sort of desaturated these colors are, right? It's very muted, and part of that could be stylistically, right? They could be wanting a more muted world, but it's not just the colors, it's the contrast in the colors and how quickly everything becomes sort of washed out and muddied. So for example, you might look at this and say, okay, well, give them the benefit of the doubt. The ground's supposed to be a sort of light beigey dirt. So of course it's going to look like that. And then when we look here though, and we look at, the nighttime and a lot of these colors, like if we go here, it becomes so sort of washed. It's that Unreal Engine look, right? It becomes washed out and we lose all this detail. And in part, we lose it because of the shadows, right? Because it's so dark and you're not really getting those details. But even, when we start zooming in here, a lot of the color saturations, a lot of the details down in here, it just starts to get muddy. It starts to get that Unreal Engine look, right? And you might say, okay, well, that's just nighttime and it's foggy. It's supposed to be like that. But then you have other games. And these games, for example, Crimson Desert, and you could see such strong use of contrast here. And you could really see the difference if I grab these, for example, side by side. And again, this is not a commentary on the games. This is purely looking at the tone mapping, whereas Crimson Desert is built with an in-home engine, and it doesn't have the Unreal Engine quote unquote look, right? Let's look at Unreal Engine, and we'll jump into the actual engine in a moment as well. And I just wanted to show you some before and after. So this is for this, I decided to use a plugin called Ultra Dynamic Sky just because it's one in which like so many people use. And so I figured it would be like the easiest to sort of measure this between. And so this is the default ACES tone mapper um, with default ultra dynamic sky. This nothing really done to it except adjusted the exposure so that everything can be kind of seen, so nothing's really blown out. And as we could see here, the color swatch, the gradient, and the image, they're all kind of just flat. Now, yes, you can move the light to make it more dramatic, but that's the thing, right? Is like right now, as an artist, we're all kind of like forced to like make these concessions in order to make something that like looks good. Like, why can't my environment just look good and have good contrast, good saturation, like at high noon? Why does my environment only look good at like golden hour, right? And so that's one of the frustrations with Unreal Engine, right? Is it adds a sort of gray overlay that you might not even recognize unless you're looking for it. But here, as we're looking at tone mapping, we can clearly see it. And then this is with AgX. And again, I didn't really spend too much time. I wasn't like dialing in the best post process settings. These are just the same settings, just with the default tone mapper and with AgX. And you can see how much clearer this is, how much stronger, more vibrant the colors are. And, of course, after the fact, you can balance it if you want your game to be look less saturated, if you want more or less shadow contrast, like you can always adjust all that, right? But the point is the base tone mapper, should be something in which you can feel strong about, something in which, when utilizing and developing your game, you don't have to wrestle with it, right? And using this tone mapper in our development, we've noticed like we don't have to really wrestle with it. We've gotten so used to lighting around the default tone mapper that we have to light things a little bit differently. But like the values and all that. But as we could see here, like the color saturations, the tones, the gradient of the sky. So down here, by the way, this is just the gradient from literally from left to right of the sky here. And then this is a gradient from left to right of the sky here. And so you could see not only are we getting more color saturation, but we're also getting actual color. When it comes here, it's just kind of like beigeish, purplish color. And this is just kind of like gray. And then if we look at it black and white, this is actually flipped. It should be the other way around. This is the AgX, and this one is Asus. But not only just, the contrast, but if you look at the actual grass here, like the difference in detail that we can actually see, same with the background over here, right? So the difference in detail in the different blades of grass, they just pop. And that's one of the other things too that we've noticed is like the normal maps, even the normal maps pop a lot more. Like not the normal intensity. I mean, like you just see the details, the albedo details, the normal details, the roughness details is so much clearer. And then here's same thing at night. This one was color balance. I was balancing it to sort of match the color of the game, what we're going for nighttime. This isn't anything final because obviously it's just a test scene. But this is the AGX scene where we could see there's a lot more, contrast. The sky is, kind of bright, but that's kind of the vibe we're going for. But yeah, it's a bit more bright. You could see the blades of grass, the glints and everything. And this is what I want to point out here, which we'll talk about in a second. But then again, the default tone mapper is just, it's almost like you just threw some gray over the top of it. But this is the magic here that is really important as far as like, well, what's the big difference here? The big difference is the mid tone. And so if we look at the actual ASUS, I'll move this over here since we're talking about it over here. If we look at the actual ASUS color curve, you can see how smooth the curve is here. And you can see like, the shadows and highlights are fine. But then once we get here, this ramp is just so, it's just so smooth, right? And so because of that though, when we look at the difference here, we zoom in here, it's just like the same color. Like it gets, I'll keep saying it, it just gets muddied, right? There's no clear gradient here. It's just like I see the gradient here, and then I see it kind of change here, right? And then this is just, I don't know what this is. Then if we look here, you can literally, because of the screen artifacting, you can literally see the changes in the color. I don't know how it is for you guys with the YouTube compression, but for me, I can literally see like the lines where the gradient is. And again, this becomes really important because, we want to maintain that rich color. We want to maintain those color details. So I wanted to give you guys a living example between AGX and ASUS. And so this is AGX, and we'll look at ASUS after the fact. Now, there's still plenty of balancing to go on. I mean, still need to build out the environments, add enemies, as well as adjust our own post process and our own color correction. However, really just pay attention to the change in tone between the AGX and the ASUS, between the lights, the contrast, and the saturations and the tones. Now, one thing AGX does really well is it brings out a lot of detail in the colors, in the normals, and just overall details in the environment. They tend to pop a lot more with AGX compared to ASUS, which will sort of flatten things out as we see when we switch to it. So if I go into first person perspective, for example, and we go up to like this wall, And we could see all the gradients within this wall with the AGX tone mapper, right? And we could see all these details. Everything just sort of pops, which is really nice. And again, if you want to reduce contrast, saturation, all that stuff, you can still do that on top of it. This is just our own aesthetic we're going for. And then this is ASUS. And it's not inherently bad, but we can see the difference in the contrast and the saturation tones and everything between ASUS and AGX. And all we did here is just change the tone mapper. We didn't, adjust the post process. We kept it all the same. And we could see how huge of a difference. So the one other thing to keep in mind as well is that your workflow, how you light, how you balance your post process is going to change. So this is ASUS in that test map from the image that we just saw, right? That we made. And as you can see here, like, we balance the lighting and everything. And so it doesn't look necessarily bad, but there is this sort of gray wash to everything, right? And we can maybe crunch the shadows a bit, but then once we do that, all of this is going to start to really fade to black, and we're going to start to lose a lot of color detail there. And so that's where the change to AGX sort of comes into play, right? As well as the clouds. Like, if we look around here and we stare at the clouds, and the difference between the clouds here with ASUS and then the clouds from AGX is going to be huge. Then if I swap the shader file and then I run the console command, now we can see the difference in the vibrancy here, right? And so this is a lot more crisp, it's a lot more clear. And there's some balancing to do with the fire. It's getting a little blown out right there. But that's really just because of the emissives. As one thing that you do need to balance with AGX is the light intensity. Lights get a lot brighter, a lot faster with AGX. So that is one, consideration to keep in mind. But again, as we can see here, like the world is just a lot more vibrant. It has that crispness to it that most basically every Unreal Engine game that's coming out right now just simply doesn't have because it's using that default tone mapper, the ASUS tone mapper, which as we've been seeing here, it just has that gray sort of overlay. So if you want to learn how to install the AGX tone mapper, I'm actually going to hand that section off to my co-developer and principal engineer, Ross.
Hey everybody, I'm Ross, co-founder of Hidden Empire and the primary developer and creative lead on the game. I'd like to talk a little bit today about replacing the tone mapper in Unreal Engine. Let's get started. You can see behind here I have the GitHub gist for the AGX tone mapper shader file, and it has some instructions for how to go ahead and replace your default Unreal ACES tone mapper with the AgX tone mapper. So first of all, we want to open your project settings in Unreal and make sure your working color space is set to sRGB/rec 709. And then you want to open the post-process tonemap.usf file, which is in Engine, Shaders, Private, inside of your Unreal Engine version install. I have an example of that here. And for my version, I am in 5.6. So you can see here, I've got it in a custom area, but on my disk. But for you, it might be on the C drive or one of your other drives, and possibly in program files, etc. But you want to find this file here, post-process tonemap.usf. If I go ahead and open it, and we want to locate the line color lookup table. And once you find this, okay, let's make this a little bigger for everybody. Once you find this, you want to replace the default here, which is setting the out device color to the result of color lookup table on final linear color, to apply AGX final linear color. Now I have an additional function here, color lookup table AGX, And that is a custom setup I did here based on some comments in the GitHub gist. That will be available on our Hidden Empire Patreon for everybody to get. But it's pretty easy to replicate if you want that. The difference is between doing just apply AgX and this additional color lookup table custom function is going to be whether or not your post-process volume will support global color tweaks and lookup tables. So if you don't need that, you can just go ahead and do it without that. But if you do want it, you can check our Patreon and get that file. You'll need to do this step. Find the color lookup table function, and after the scope of the function, add the code below. So let's go ahead and select this. Yeah. And then in your post-process tonemap.usf, color lookup table may have to switch a little bit more. This is my custom version, which is mostly the same as this one. And then you would hit paste here. So once you've done this, you are almost all set. The only other thing you want is go ahead and call the command recompile shaders space changed from the console inside of Unreal. That will recompile all the shaders that are dependent on this post-process tone mapper universal shader file. It says to restart the editor, but that is technically not needed. Maybe the first time, but even then, probably not needed. However, then you can go ahead and you can adjust settings and get the look you want.
Now, as the art director and art lead on our game, as you might imagine, that sort of stuff is out of my wheelhouse, and maybe it is for you as well. If so, I'm pleased to announce we've gone ahead and uploaded the .usf file on our Patreon for you, which is now live. Official announcement coming shortly after this of what you can expect from that. Just know all proceeds are going to offset dev costs in outsourcing art, audio, effects, and more. To install it is as simple as dragging and dropping, and poof, you've officially now have swapped the ASUS tone mapper with the AgX tone mapper. Be warned, however, this is a change to the engine and will overwrite the ASUS default tone mapper in all projects using the specific engine version, so be sure to back up your ASUS tone mapper in a safe place just in case. Now, there's so much exciting news, updates, courses, and more coming soon, so be sure to like, subscribe, join the Discord. All necessary links for the video will be in the description down below. Now that's it for this one, and I'll see you guys next time.